Radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination? That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm glad you could join us today. This is about an exercise in free thinking. It's more so than just let's get together and complain or bemoan how horrible the world is treating us. But there's a real need for people who can think clearly and independently. And thank you to members of the Idaho media, among others, for providing us with ample evidence of why this is the case. I'm very happy to be your host for the show and have some fun stuff to share with you today that hopefully at the end of the day leaves you feeling more certain of who you are and what you stand for than just simply, who you're frustrated with or what makes you angry. But definitely we're going to be talking a little bit about some media bias, alleged media bias. First of all, I want to start out with a story about libraries. And this is becoming more and more of a situation, particularly when we have libraries that are really catering towards what they call an inclusive and diverse reading list. So this is regarding the Meridian Library. I find it nonsensical. Meridian Library District responds to claims of pornography and indoctrination. And apparently what has set this off is there have been community members from a group that calls themselves, I think they're Liberty Dogs, something. Anyway, they talk about them further here in the article, but they're concerned about what's being offered to kids. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I want you to pay attention to the attitude of victimization that comes through from some of the library sources. Now, this article here says that, these people are particularly attending board meetings because they're concerned about inappropriate material that's being made available to children. And the story starts with this wonderful story of a grandmother and her 11-year-old grandson. They're going to the library, a book under his arm, and it's a Percy Jackson book, and he's just, enjoying reading, and it takes his mind places that he's never been before, and always the next adventure is just another page away. But that's where the trouble starts, or so we're told. And the idea being that, but somebody wants to deny this young boy access to books that could improve his life. So we start out with a quote here from Meridian District Library Board Chair Megan Larson, who says, it's a little disappointing and shocking. This small but vocal group wants to take such a tremendous asset away from this community. Now, I'm not sure what the asset is, if she's just talking, a particular book, or if she's talking about particularly a genre of books like LGBTQ, classics for kids or something. But for the past couple of meetings, apparently community members have attended the board meetings to voice concerns about content found in Meridian libraries. Now, this group called Idaho Liberty Dogs encourages their members to attend MLD meetings to oppose pornographic and LGBTQ content. You must know, of course, that this group is conservative. So I assume that is our cue, like Pavlov's dogs, instead of ringing a bell. But by hearing that they're conservative, we should begin salivating at the prospect that they're probably up to no good. So there's concern. Why would such a group exist in the first place? Well, the Idaho Liberty Dogs on their Facebook page says, did you know that public libraries across Idaho are being used as taxpayer-funded grooming locations to indoctrinate young children and teenagers into the LGBTQ lifestyles? Now, you may disagree with them, but I think there's enough plausibility here that people could reasonably discuss whether or not that's taking place or not. And by the way, the sense of grooming that they're using here doesn't necessarily mean they're grooming them for, some kind of sexual exploitation necessarily. They're definitely grooming them to be helpful little left-wing activists, though. So, the word grooming doesn't seem to be a bad word, except that the people on the left who are doing it really don't want us using it. So take from that what you will. But the same post outlines 5 books that the Idaho Liberty Dogs find inappropriate. Genderqueer, Sex is a Funny Word, Two Boys Kissing, Big Hard Sex Criminals, and Captain Underpants. Now, I can tell you the only one of these that I've actually seen myself was Captain Underpants, and that's a book that my kids had years ago and read. And I can understand why some parents would say, yeah, that's really not for us. Likewise, I can understand why a parent would balk at the idea of, what books did you check out today? And if their kid brings home stuff like Genderqueer or Two Boys Kissing or something, I could see parents raising an eyebrow and saying, okay, maybe that's not appropriate. So as far as a group speaking up and saying, we don't agree with this, as long as their behavior is peaceful, what's the big deal? I mean, do we really value inclusivity? Do we value diversity? Or are we all supposed to think exactly the same thing? Because uniformity is always the hallmark of a very authoritarian or even totalitarian society. But, as long as we're giving lip service to diversity, well, maybe we should consider some actual diversity. And the truth of the matter is, not everybody's going to resonate with these particular book titles. So, keeping that in mind, they talked with Associate Librarian Nikki Kreiner, who works in the children's department at the Cherry Lane Library. Captain Underpants was the only book she could find in the children's section when KTVB asked her to point out where these books could be found in the library. Now, we're talking lowbrow humor often enjoyed by middle school boys, according to Kreiner. Larson said, I think it's nonsensical. Yes, there are materials in the library that are LGBTQ content. Listen to this, though. We are responding to what our community is interested. This typo is part of the story. This is a screenshot from the actual story. We are responding to what our community is interested, not every community member. So I guess you would expect a little pushback then from time to time, maybe? Just a thought. But certainly our community is interested in a diverse and inclusive collection. We provide that here at the library. Now, no parent has ever voiced a concern to Kreiner about books in this section or whether they're appropriate or not. That's interesting. I don't know how closely my parents monitored my books, but they definitely were interested in what I was checking out from the library as a kid. But Maple says, you should be monitoring what your kids are reading. Not an easy job, but you need to be on top of it. I think if you talk to your kids and they talk to you, that eliminates a lot of problems. I agree with that 100%. So the idea is, parents, rather than outsourcing this to some committee or even outsourcing it to lawmakers or other, people in official positions, maybe this is the time where you need to step up and just be more assertive in how you go about vetting what your kids are interested in and being interested in what your kids are studying. I mean, it's not like it's a bad thing to pay attention to what they want. Anyway, solving it at the lowest possible level is the best way to do it. And then you don't run into as many problems of, is this official censorship or not? Or by the same token, is this official indoctrination pushing these kinds of things on kids before they're ready? Anyhow. Comment here from Tamari Kennedy. Liberal dogs are big-time establishment. My kids read Captain Underpants. They attended Catholic school. We as parents reviewed and chose collectively every book and curriculum every year. Kudos to you for being involved. And look, my wife is a public school teacher, so I know that I have heard her say many, many times, parental involvement is so much more important. And if you're slacking on this, and if you're just leaving, kids will find something they want to read, don't be surprised if they come home with some things that you may or may not agree with. But I also think it's very safe to say that we have a lot of activism taking place, not just in the school halls and in the school classrooms, but yes, even in the public libraries. There are many different ways that young minds can be reached, and not all of them are bad. But parents, you need to be involved, and if it's something that you don't feel is appropriate, age appropriate for your kid, that's your call to make. Don't outsource that to teachers. Don't outsource it to librarians. Don't outsource it to lawmakers. That's your choice. All right, shifting gears. This is an interesting one, too, just from the standpoint of the way that this article is written. It really gives kind of a sense of incredulity. Idaho cities decline federal coronavirus relief money. And you can almost, I'm looking for the little sub-headline, like, what the heck? What are they thinking? Why won't they take the money? Well, let's take a closer look at this. This is, this is an article from idahopress.com. 16 Idaho cities have rejected a combined $700,000 in federal coronavirus rescue money, and one city that accepted $550,000 might have to return it if it doesn't approve spending it. Now, it's a small part of the $5.74 billion that Idaho received in the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan Act signed by President Biden in 2021. But it can be a significant amount for some Idaho cities. I want you to listen, though, to the reasons why some of these Idaho cities said, I don't know if it's worth it taking this money. Many elected officials at 16 small cities are either volunteers or receive token payments. Some officials said they've been confused about allowed uses for the money or strings attached. By the way, others said the cost of administering and tracking the money outweighs the benefit. Some didn't have the staff or appear to have the staff or expertise to evaluate federal guidelines for using the money. One mayor said the city declined because they didn't have an emergency and impose a mask mandate. Fortunately, neither of which was required. But I got to admire city leaders who have the kind of foresight to be thinking of, okay, but what conditions do come with this? And let's face it, there were conditions that came with a lot of those federal funds that unfortunately translated into a lot of states following in lockstep with the CDC's guidance when really they probably shouldn't have. Of the 16 cities that haven't taken the money, the south central city of Hanson, with a population of about 1,400, is leaving the most on the table at $276,000. Now, I happen to live pretty close to Hanson and have family that live there, and that's a lot of money for a small city. But Mayor Joe Ratto says he wants to give it another look now that it's clear that the money could be used for infrastructure projects. Their city has an annual budget of around $1 million, he said. He says we could still use it because we've still got to do upgrades. We can upgrade water. We can upgrade sewer. I believe we can upgrade playgrounds. All three of those things we're working on now to upgrade. We're just a small town trying to make things work. Wow. I can see the temptation. Look, I feel for these small town elected leaders. But I think it's wise. Even if someone hands you, if they come out with a big wheelbarrow full of money, you should always be in the habit of asking, okay, what's the catch? Some people are just, incredulous. And the tone of this article really is like, we can't understand why they wouldn't take this. Alex Adams, Idaho Division of Financial Management Administrator, said the $700,000 is in the state treasury. The state has asked U.S. Treasury officials how to return it. It's not clear if cities that declined their share could still get it if they changed their minds. The tiny city of Hope on the shore of Lake Pend Oreille in northern Idaho turned down about $21,000. Now they have about 100 residents. Spirit Lake in the Idaho Panhandle accepted around $545,000, but the city council has declined to spend it. Now, Mayor Jeremy Cowperthwaite says outsiders who don't live in the area show up at city council meetings to argue against using the federal money that Cowperthwaite hopes to use on badly needed water and sewer projects. As mayor, he says, I would prefer to accept the money and use it wherever Spirit Lake needs to use it. It would be the fiscally responsible way to use it, in my opinion. All right. Well, I guess I can understand they're never going to have enough money, right? These small cities especially are never going to have enough money to meet all of their needs. And so they have to choose, okay, do we want this park? Do we want the new water system? Do we want to repave this road with, the potholes so deep that you can hear an echo when you shout down into them? Those are the kind of choices that they have to make. But I really applaud these elected leaders who have at least had the foresight not to jump on the bandwagon and not to immediately just assume that, well, somebody waved money in front of me. I've got to do tricks. I've got to do whatever it takes, to get that money. I like the question here, too, about outsiders. These outsiders who don't want them spending federal money. Maybe it's people who just understand that nothing comes for free from the federal government. And sometimes that's the hard part about municipal government. But this is one of the great things, too, is that your municipal government is close enough to you. You probably have more influence there than you do even at the state legislature and certainly, at the federal level. So I applaud those who have stood firm, those who have said, we're not sure that we really want to spend that money because the hassle of tracking it, the cost of tracking it and everything just isn't worth it to us. It also, I think, shows that not everybody's willing to sell their soul in a buyer's market. So when Uncle Sugar is out there making it rain with free money, it's good to know that there are some people who have the self-control to say, yeah, that's not necessary. We'll be okay. Those are communities that are going to be in a better position if and when something major comes along and the federal government, well, we're here to save the day. You just sign on the dotted line and we'll take over. It'd be nice to see some of these localities say, nah, it's okay. We don't need your help. Thank you, but no thank you. All right, I'm going to shift gears here. A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege of being on Wayne Hoffman's The Hoff-Time Report. And along with Greg Pruitt, we talked about some of the bias in media. And it's been interesting that apparently that one really stung because there are some members of Idaho media that have really taken exception to the fact these three people, which I think was the nicest thing that they've called us. We're sitting around talking about what we do as if somehow what we're doing is not the most upright and forthright and noble profession of them all. Well, let's pull up the headline here. This is actually a commentary from Chuck Malloy. Media bashing not new in Idaho politics. But I want you to hear how Chuck approaches this because Chuck seems to be kind of an apologist for a lot of the media bias. And I love how he starts out here with newsflash: conservatives hate the liberal media. Oh, is it, not liberal? To only conservatives can be in real words, and liberal has to be in quotation marks. Always have and always will. Okay, hate. I talk about this a lot. That is the unspecified predicate. That is the phrase that is thrown out there to get people on the defensive. Well, these three guys obviously were talking about things that they hate, and conservatives hate liberal media. Tell you what, I don't hate anybody. Life is too short to carry around hate. But I often will warn people when I see something that is not on the up and up. And thank you, Idaho media, for giving us plenty of opportunities to do that. The article, or the commentary rather, says Wayne Hoffman, president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, well describes sentiments from the right. What you read in most local daily newspapers or see on the daily news isn't really journalism, it's leftist propaganda. Now again, depending on where you're standing, there are some people who will be nodding their heads, others going, well, I don't know if I would agree with that. He says Idaho's media is hot garbage and encourages others, including his followers, to stay away. Now, because I was part of that conversation, I want you to know that was not the crux of what we talked about. There was plenty of talk about you need to vet what you read, you need to pay attention to what you're reading, and ask questions and be skeptical, question everything. But yes, there's ample reason to do so. Now, Chuck Malloy says today's version of political bias wars is not as civil. He talks about a time when he got crosswise with somebody, and well, they were both on the same program, and we both agreed in the end that we're really not that far apart, and that's great. That's great. But I guess I would use this as an opportunity to point out that, Chuck, statists, both on the left and on the right, often find places to come together, and it's called bipartisanship. And, they celebrate it as, look at us, we're getting along. But, people who are not so statist in their thinking, in other words, people who believe that just because something isn't under the direct control of the state doesn't mean it's necessarily out of control. We look at the use of the state with a bit of a skeptical eye, because for too many people, use of the state becomes, this is our key to doing good. And what they don't realize is that they can do a lot of harm using the force of the state in place of persuasion. Well, it doesn't matter as long as something good happens. So he talks about how Hoffman has been making snide comments about the media for years. Yes, have you seen what the media has been saying about Wayne Hoffman? Snide is not what I would call it. I would say they've been acidic. They have been absolutely defamatory, and they love it. They revel in it. But he had two fellow conservatives. Again, we're hung up on the labels, but these guys, we have to tell you who they are so you know that you can't believe a single word they say. Greg Pruitt of Idaho Dispatch and podcaster Brian Hyde in a forum about how to handle media malpractice. There were no clear examples of media bias on the reporting end. Just, Chuck, between you and me, that's what this program is for. So follow along if you would. But some general comments about how the media has shifted to the left. I think a more accurate way would be how the media has openly embraced the left-wing point of view as if there is no other way to see things. They also talked about how the liberal media used terms like far-right and extremists to describe legislators. Not just legislators, they're using those terms to describe anyone who doesn't agree perfectly with them. You don't have to be a legit extremist. In fact, really, this is another one of those unspecified predicates here. Far right, extremist. We're supposed to just come up with some horrible association for what that means. But it's kind of a catch-all. It's almost a cuss word of sorts. Now, Chuck says to at least some followers on Wayne's World, descriptions can be based on how legislators score on Hoffman's, and again in quotation marks because it's not real, freedom index. Those who score high are principled conservatives who can do no wrong even when they do something ridiculous. Give us an example, for instance. Any Republican who grades low is clearly a rhino. Now look, the Idaho Freedom Foundation is not the only think tank that uses these kinds of matrix to gauge by the actions of state legislatures which ones are voting on policy most in accordance with freedom. And it's a very solid way of doing this. I mean, some people may say, well, it's not fair because it shows me with a very low score. Well, if your actions were that you were supporting policy that was very anti-freedom, it probably should reflect poorly on the freedom index. As far as giving a pass to everybody who scores high, no. I think when freedom is the ultimate goal here, that's where our attention has to be. And I like this. Of course, this really got the attention of the Idaho Press Club. In particular, it got Betsy Russell quite fired up. She spent 4 decades reporting on Idaho politics. She's the president of the Idaho Press Club. She takes exception to the idea that Idaho's media has taken a turn to the left. And okay, I'll just read her words, and you can decide for yourself if this is playing victim or not. That's not true, she wrote. I've been here all along, and I know this from firsthand experience. I still do what I've always done: seek the truth and report. Hoffman's continued agitation against real journalists is encouraging his followers to engage in actual harassment against the hardworking reporters who work to bring you the news every day. It needs to stop. You know, being called out on misinformation or inconclusive information or misleading information or omitted information, that's not the same thing as being harassed. That's being called out for not doing your job. That's being called out rightly for trying to peddle a particular agenda to people as if we wouldn't be able to figure it out. And when you say it needs to stop, what exactly does that mean? Do we need some kind of official public policy that would punish people who would call out journalists on this and call them out when they're not behaving as journalists and using loaded language with judgment and with steering words to try and steer our feelings in a particular direction? That doesn't seem quite right. So I'm curious what she means by this has got to stop. Now, of course, Betsy says that reporting from the Capitol, or this actually, I'm sorry, this is Chuck who says, from what I've seen, reporting from the Capitol is as strong as it's ever been. Betsy and the Lewiston Tribune's Bill Spence are 2 of the best in Idaho. Then you have the Idaho Capital Sun, Idaho Education News, and the Associated Press covering the State House from all angles. Whoa, hold up there, Charles. All angles? Or is just this all angles that are acceptable to the people in power and that don't really threaten their standing too much, or don't hold them, hold their feet to the fire and make them be accountable? Because there is such a thing. Yes, we're covering it from all the angles. So I guess we don't need all those independent people out there going around digging up facts and reporting on it. He says, with all the veteran reporters and institutional knowledge, that is what we're supposed to believe, it's not a pleasant environment for politicians who stonewall the media, dance around the truth, or outright lie. What Hoffman is doing, says Russell, is so repugnant that it cries out for robust denunciation. She gets really upset when we don't believe her or when we cast doubt on what she and her other fellow members of the press are doing. Now, look, to be fair, there are times when they will get things right, and there are times when there are reporters and journalists who actually do the honest thing and report things in such a way that we are left with the facts and no judgment. So we can actually read, we can assess, we can decide for ourselves, what does this all mean? But the defensiveness that Betsy Russell is showing here, I don't know, man. She's pretty upset about being called out for not being perfectly forthcoming in how her take seems to favor one particular side, and that's always whoever's in power, or at least the left-wing portion of whoever's in power. One final note here. Of course, to the far-right extremists, or whatever you want to call them, a denunciation from Betsy Russell is the best thing that can happen for their cause, and Hoffman's as well. With Wayne's backing, conservatives will go on thinking the reporting profession is filled by left-wing socialists. Now, he's setting Wayne up as kind of a straw man, and I guess it's because Wayne has taken a lot of slings and arrows in trying to stand up for freedom. And you can't stand up for freedom. You can't stand up for anything without paying a price, because there are people who are very seriously opposed to it, and they fight hard and they fight dirty, and they're going to do everything they can to discourage people from listening to people like Wayne Hoffman or what the Idaho Freedom Foundation is doing, or people like me. Just here's the bottom line, though. It's not about we're just trying to keep politicians honest. It's about, can you trust what the press is telling you? Would they engage in fudging of facts or hyperbole? Would, for instance, let's just say, for instance, just hypothetically, if a story were to pop up that, say, the President of the United States, his son was involved in some really weird, freaky, illegal stuff, and just happened to record a whole bunch of that or leave a bunch of that information on his laptop. And just hypothetically, what if that laptop was somehow left with a repairman and it became common knowledge that this was, in fact, the president's son's laptop? The press would be very forthright about that, right? I mean, they would tell us if there was something to it. They wouldn't just dismiss it as Russian propaganda or, Russian disinformation. They sure wouldn't spike the story rather than tell us what was going on, right? What's that? Oh, your sarcasm meter is starting to smoke and emit showers of sparks. Oh, well, then it's working well because that was all sarcasm. But that's exactly what the media has done. So yeah, they do choose. They do pick sides. They try to steer things in a direction where this is the only conclusion that any decent person could come to. And that's where you get headlines like this. Idaho nears the fulfillment of Aryan Nations leaders' vision for creating a white nationalist haven. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Richard Butler die like 20 years ago? He was the founder of the Aryan Nations, and I believe that, yeah, he may have had a goal at one time of, we'll have this white nationalist homeland, there in northern Idaho. It didn't pan out. But this is a legit headline from a couple of days ago, actually just about a week ago. Idaho nears the fulfillment of the Aryan Nations leaders' vision for creating a white nationalist haven. That must mean that anybody who moves here is a part of that. Oh, wait, here's another headline. Oh, yes. Reagan's IFF and GOP organizations have laid out welcome mat for extremists to move to Idaho. Now, if you're a recent transplant to the Gem State, came back after 25 years, and here I am a year later, I was really surprised to find out that really, I thought I was coming back here to be near family and actually to enjoy an island of freedom in a sea of increasingly unfree states. And I really felt that as we prepared and made our move back here. But I did not realize that there was some white supremacist dog whistle that apparently was, trying to bring me back here, and, that I was somehow playing into the hands of the Aryan Nations. Yeah, I would encourage you to read the article. It's in the Daily Cause. It's a 2-part article. I would encourage you to read it for yourself. You might want to keep a barf bag handy just in case. It is... It's very heavy on hyperbole, very heavy on dubious connections. Well, you can see, and because this politician once drank a glass of water, the same liquid that Adolf Hitler used to sustain his life through most of his lifetime, you can see where they're really coming from pretty much the same place. I mean, it's hysterical. But again, I point you back to the idea, but we got to do something about this. We got to do something. What exactly is that? And when you're throwing around language like everybody's extremist, everybody is, somehow, this violent extremist, when it's really just people who love freedom. I mean, there's got to be a better way of sorting the sheep from the goats, so to speak. So in the interest of that, I want to share with you a quote from C.S. Lewis. This is a guy who had an unusual amount of wisdom, and I like the attitude that he addresses here. He says, suppose one reads a story of filthy atrocities in the paper. Then suppose that something turns up suggesting that the story might not be quite true or not quite so bad as it was made out. Is one's first feeling, thank God they even they aren't quite so bad as that? Or is it a feeling of disappointment and even a determination to cling to the first story for the sheer pleasure of thinking your enemies as bad as possible? If it's the second, then it is, he says, I'm afraid, the very first step in a process which, if followed to the end, will make us into devils. You see, one is beginning to wish that black was a little blacker. If we give that wish its head, later on we shall wish to see gray as black, and then to see white itself as black. Finally, we shall insist on seeing everything, God and our friends and ourselves included, as bad, and will not be able to stop doing it. We shall be fixed forever in a universe of pure hatred. Now, I'm not trying to accuse, members of the press of being, consumed by pure hatred. But I do have to wonder if the way that they look at people who are on the conservative side of the spectrum as they're all bad. They're always looking for the very worst. They're always looking to report it in the worst possible way. I wonder if they aren't playing into this trait that C.S. Lewis identified. And in so doing, becoming the kind of people who can't see anything but bad. Because that is the agenda that really holds sway in their minds. It's just a possibility. I'm not saying I know that that's the fact and that's the only thing it could be. It just raises a very interesting possibility. And it puts on us, you and me, that incredible responsibility to be careful, not jump to conclusions so quickly, to ask questions, to question everything you hear, everything you see, everything you read, including what you're hearing and seeing and reading from me, before you hang your hat on it. But it's especially important that you do that with whatever the Idaho media is putting out there for you, because they'll be very happy to do the thinking for you if you allow them. My point is simply that you don't have to allow them to do so. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination? That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.